My name is Robert Ritter. I live in Monticello, Illinois, and I am 69 and a half years old.
Are you originally from Monticello?
Originally from Farmer City.
Okay. When did you move to Monticello?
1967 is when I moved, when my wife and I got married.
And then when and where did you serve in the military?
I served from 1967 until 69, so approximately 2 years.
Where did you serve?
I served in Vietnam, actually off the shores of Vietnam in the Navy.
All right, so let's talk about a little bit why originally did you join the Navy?
Well, basically, at that time, I had been through DeVry Tech and had electronics background, so I knew that I wanted to get into some type of field that had electronics. So I was thinking either the Air Force or the Naval Reserve, and the Naval Reserve had a position for me because they could take me for the same amount of time as what the draft could. So I decided to go with the Navy and rather than being drafted into the Army.
What made you want to choose the Navy over being drafted in the Army?
Well, basically, I was going to have the opportunity to use my education in the Navy because they had electronics that I could work with and take care of, where the Army, I figured I probably would end up in the infantry there, and that wasn't going to give me much as far as training with my education and training.
So then let's talk a little bit. So what did you do on the ship with that training in electronics? What was your job?
My job was actually maintaining the gunfire control equipment and also operating the gunfire control equipment. So I did both ends of it. And I was actually in charge of two 3-inch gun control systems on the ship and worked with two others. So there was actually 4 systems that I was in charge of, and 2 of them I actually worked on.
What was, if you were to explain this to someone who doesn't have an electronics background or doesn't know much about the Navy, what was your daily job with that gunfire control equipment? Somebody who doesn't know what that means.
Well, the first thing that we did after we had quarters in the morning was we would go up and turn our equipment on, check it out, make sure that everything was working like it was supposed to. We would be actually setting up the computers, and the guns would actually go into automatic or operation, and then they would move as we moved. The gun directors, they would move to follow it, and if they didn't, we knew we had a problem. So that was our first thing that we did in the morning, was we checked all of our equipment out to make sure everything was working and doing what it was supposed to.
What else did you do with the equipment? What else was your job?
Well, if anything broke down or we had a problem, then it was my job, or part of my job, to correct any problems that we had and get the equipment so that it was working like it was supposed to, and would be able to perform if we were actually using it to fire guns or whatever, or track. Like the radars, they had to be able to track a target, and your guns had to follow. So it was a coordination between our radar and our gunfire control computers and the guns.
What were these guns used for? Are you talking about that you need this equipment to perform? What was its function?
The guns were actually used, the 3-inch and 5-inch were used in a dual purpose. They could be used to intercept or take out a boat or whatever was on the water, and they could also be used to shoot down aircraft. Fortunately, the North Vietnamese had no aircraft, so we didn't have that very much to worry about. It was mostly just the small little what they call gook boats that used to come out from the Vietnamese shore at times and observe our ship and see what was going on, or try and find out what was going on. We never actually had any of them that gave us any real problems where we had to actually shoot a ship out of, or a boat out of the water. So we were very fortunate in that respect.
What else did the guns like shoot at least when you were on the ship?
Their main objective was to take on targets that we had that were on shore, which could be anywhere from 5 miles, 10 miles. Our maximum range in both cases was about 25 miles that we could shoot from our ship to the target. And we basically were in support of the infantry that was on the shore, the Marines and the other armed services, Army. We would fire in support of them to either neutralize or to take out a target.
What were these targets exactly?
They could range from a bunker that was where the Vietnamese were hiding, or we could have a lot of our job, especially when we were in North Vietnam, was intercepting the little supply boats that were coming down from North Vietnam to South Vietnam. That was our job, to take these boats and actually sink them so that the supplies that were on them were destroyed and they couldn't use them against us in South Vietnam.
So did you ever sink a boat, your ship?
We've sunk several boats. I wouldn't have any idea what the total number was that we actually took out. Probably one of our biggest times that we did the most firing of any time that we were over there was when the city of Hue was under siege by the North Vietnamese, and we actually were able to shoot from our ship into the city of Hue and we basically destroyed most of the city around it.
Did you ever think about like what that meant? Like think about what you were hitting, or could you see it at all, like the effects of?
Well, we couldn't see it because of the foliage that was over there. Everything was heavily foliated. It was kind of like a forest or whatever. And as I said, we were shooting anywhere from 10 to 25 miles from our ship to the target, so we couldn't see what we were actually hitting. We had spotters that were on shore, both in the air and on the ground, that were helping to direct our fire in to the targets and do what they needed to do to destroy them.
Even if you couldn't see it, did you ever think about like what your targets were hitting, or like what the effects were of the ship you were on?
Well, we knew we were shooting targets that probably had live people around, but that was something that you just didn't take into consideration or think about, because you knew that it was a case of either you destroy their target or they were going to attempt to destroy or kill our people. So it was kind of a case of where we were actually the ones that were in charge, I guess, of saying who was going to do what as far as the war was concerned.
Did you ever worry that any of the gunfire hit civilians or anything?
That was one of the things that the United States government basically, they tried to keep from hitting civilian targets as much as possible, but sometimes it's an inevitable situation. And it was actually especially hard over there because the Viet Cong would infiltrate into the villages, and we had no idea of who was the enemy and who was the good people. So that was part of the infantry's job, was to go in and sort these people out and identify the targets that were actually Vietnamese targets, and then we would destroy them from that information that we got from spotters that were on the shores.
And so were you the one actually firing the guns?
That was one of my jobs. We had a what they called a stable element, which was connected to the guns, and we had just like a gun pistol in our hand, and we would get orders from the operations department that we were supposed to fire so many guns, so many salvos, and we would actually be the ones that, when the guns were ready loaded, then we actually did the shooting.
What was it like to shoot the gun?
It was just like sitting here in the chair pulling a trigger on a gun. There was no, you didn't feel the concussion of the gun or anything like that as far as where we were located in the ship.
Did it ever mean anything to you to fire a gun, or did it have any, like, even if there was no, like, you physically didn't feel any repercussions, or was it, did you feel anything, or was it more just like it became routine kind of?
It was part of my job as fire control technician to do that. That was my step in the sequence that took place as far as making the guns shoot.
And then
interject in answer to Cassidy, okay, Bob? Describe the atmosphere when you guys were shooting, because you got the order either to shoot a boat or shoot at the enemy on land. Describe the atmosphere in the ship. Tell me, what was the tone? What was the what was the mood of people?
Well, basically, everybody knew that this was their specific job that they had to perform, and that's what you thought about it as, was it was your responsibility and your job to perform, and not necessarily, you weren't concerned about or thinking about other things. It was just like going to work every day. You had a certain job and a task to do, and that's basically the way you looked at the responsibility over there on the ship.
Tell me, other than, like, so we talked a little bit about the guns and the shooting. What else was like a typical day on the ship?
Well, we were basically woke up in the morning about 6 o'clock is when reveille went. We had to get up, eat breakfast. Then the first thing that we did as soon as we got through with that was we went to what we call quarters. And at that point in time, we met with our commanding officers and got information from them as to what our duties were going to be that day. And then once you found that out, then we went and checked our gun systems out, made sure that everything was working. As soon as that was done, then if anything showed up that wasn't working properly, you had to immediately get started and get it repaired so that it would be ready to go. And then the rest of the time, we were on what they call a rotating watch system, where we would be 4 hours on watch, 4 hours off, and then 4 hours that you could use for sleeping time, and then you would start the process over again.
And then you said you couldn't really see what your guns were hitting when you shot at land. How about when you, like, sunk a ship? Could you physically see that ship sink?
More than likely not, because we never actually got close enough to those ships, because most of them would hang within about 2 to 3 miles of the shore. And as I said, especially if we knew they were just small ships that were carrying supplies down, we wouldn't actually get in on top of them. We would shoot from a distance. So we didn't actually see those boats that we were actually shooting or hitting. Or at least I didn't. Now, some of the radar operators that were up in the radar gun directors, some of them possibly might have seen it, but I'm not sure that they did. It just depended. If it was night, no, you wouldn't see it. During the daytime, you might see it. And the only time that you would see it at night is if you hit a boat that had a bunch of ammunition or something like that on it. You would see the explosion, but that was it.
So then you were shooting ships then on land, and I'm sure, did you ever know if you were being accurate or not, if you hit the right target or wrong target? How did you know?
We had the spotters that were in the airplanes and also on the ground. They were telling us, you did what you were supposed to do, you hit what you're supposed to, or no, you needed to make a correction in your gun direction so that you would actually hit the target. But they were the spotters were our eyes on shore as far as telling us what we had or had not hit.
Did you ever miss a target that you know of?
Well, there were times when they would give us a spot, like you needed to go up so many yards or down so many yards, right or left, and we knew that we were close, but we weren't exactly there. But they could walk us right in to the point where we knew we were hitting our target.
So there was never a time there there was like a mistake?
I would say no. Once we're assigned a target, it was our job to destroy that target.
All right, and then I saw in your book something about Operation Sea Dragon. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, Operation Sea Dragon was the operation that the Navy participated in. We went from, well, basically just south of the DMZ, north as far as, well, the farthest north that I ever got was Haiphong Harbor, which was just outside of North Korea. But that was only in support of when they picked up the Pueblo. But basically, Operation Sea Dragon was assigned to cover and patrol all of North Vietnam and, like I said, about probably 20 miles into South Vietnam.
And your ship was part of Operation Sea Dragon?
Right, we were part of Operation Sea Dragon. It was actually, the 7th Fleet was in charge of the whole area, but we were just a portion or one ship out of probably 10 or 12 ships that were part of that group.
And then what ships were you on in the years?
I was on the USS Canberra, which was a heavy cruiser. We were basically a gun, and we had missile launchers on the back of the ship, but we never did use the missiles.
Were you on the Canberra the whole time?
Yes, I was on the Canberra from the time I went aboard ship, which was in July of '67, until I got out in January of '69.
Did you ever get breaks off the ship?
Yes, we would usually spend, well, I think the longest period of time that we ever spent out at sea was 30 days. And during that period of time, we were out there firing and shooting targets. But most of the time, our average was probably 15 to 20 days on the gun line, and then we would go back in to Subic Bay, which was in the Philippines, for either repairs that we couldn't take care of while we were out at sea, or we would go to ports of R&R, I guess they called it, for just the personnel on the ship to get off and relax a little bit and get away from the war situation.
What would you guys do in the Philippines to relax?
Well, in the Philippines, we didn't have a whole lot. In Subic Bay, there wasn't a whole lot there. There were some facilities there that were military controlled, but most of our time that we would spend there, we had some golf courses, some miniature golf courses that we were actually able to play golf. We had an island that was called Grandy Island, which was basically just an island off of the Subic Bay area that we could go out there and spend a day and have a lunch and do whatever we wanted to do out there, swim if we wanted to. And then we would come back in that night, go back to the ship, and that's where we would spend our time.
And then how we described a typical day on the ship and just kind of like your life as a sailor. How was this different than life back home?
Well, when you're home, you can come and go more or less as you want to. Of course, you have your job that you were required to do. When we were on the ship, you had pretty much a routine that you were going to be going through. You were going to be eating your meals. You were going to be doing any necessary work that needed to be done to maintain your equipment. And then you were spending 3 to 4 hours at a time on what they called watch, where you were at ready to perform your tasks of whatever you needed to do or whatever your jobs were that you had to do in regards to the ship's mission of taking care of support to the soldiers on shore.
Did you ever witness any death on the ship?
No, we did not. We were very fortunate in the fact that we never got hit by enemy fire because they basically didn't have any guns that would reach out to us. We did. I wasn't on the ship. This happened to cruise right before I got on the ship, that they got in too close to this one island over in North Vietnam, and they did actually fire back and hit up on our ship and did some minor structural damage, but that was it. No one was actually injured on the ship.
Knowing that you had that potential of maybe being fired on again, were you ever afraid of the enemy fire? Like how did that affect your mindset?
Basically, my mindset was that I would be there, and I felt like the ship was going to be our protection, and we would be able to withstand any type of conflict that the North Vietnamese would give us, whether it be from shelling from the shore or whatever. And their accuracy was not that great because they didn't have the same sophisticated radar that we had. So consequently, they couldn't do as good a job of bracketing or targeting our ships as what we could do with getting back to them.
You said like your ship was like your security. Where did you get like this confidence from that you were going to be okay?
Well, I guess you'd have to say that comes from training. You're trained to do the job that you do, and you know that if you're doing your job, chances are that you're not going to run into any difficulties as far as if they start to shoot back at you. You have the potential and the firepower to basically go back and destroy anybody that would shoot at you.
Can you tell me a little bit about this training you went through?
Well, basically I went through the same as what a regular military or Navy person would do. I went through boot camp, which in my case was a 2-week boot camp. We went to Great Lakes, got our training there, which was included both physical training and classroom training. And then I went to FDA school, which was where I got my actual training for being a gunfire control technician. And that was a 60-week school of basically telling me what I needed to do and how I needed to take care of what I was going to be responsible for when I got on the ship.
How did you do in the training?
Well, fortunately, I was the number one person in my class. I graduated number one in my FTA school, and I think part of that was due to the fact that I had prior electronic experience, because a lot of my training that I got in FTA school was maintaining electronic equipment and operating.
So are you saying, did your other classmates not have electronic experience?
A lot of them didn't have. A lot of them were just people that they graduated out of school. They were either picked by the draft or they were just joined the Navy on their own. And a lot of them, I would say a good portion of them, didn't have any additional electronic training.
Let's go back to before the war.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of said you felt like you chose the Navy because you didn't want to be drafted. Did you feel like those were your only two options?
At that point in time, it was my only two options because I had my draft papers in my hand, which meant I was either going to go into the Army or some branch of the service such as that, or go into the Navy where I could utilize the electronic training that I had.
So you were drafted? What was that? What was that like?
Basically, I wasn't drafted because I was due to be drafted, but that meant that I was going to go into service one way or the other. And because I made the choice of going into the Naval Reserve, that was the route I followed.
How did you feel about the draft at the time?
Well, basically, my feelings on that were that being an American, you need to support your government and your military. And after having gone through it, I look back at it as it was a super good training for me as an individual, and I think it's something that every young man should at least consider. I'm not saying that everybody has to do it, but I think it's something that they should consider.
So would you support a draft today? Like, what are your feelings on the draft now?
Well, I think it's been proven that our military has suffered because we don't have the draft, because we don't have the numbers of people. The good thing about it is the people that we do have in the military right now are there because they want to be. Where if you have the draft, you're going to have a situation where some of your people may not be happy with the fact that they are in the military, but the training that you can get from it and the experiences that you get from it, I think, are life-forming.
And that training and those experiences, how did they change your life?
Well, I was married for 4 months before I left for service on active duty, and I got to know my wife, but I think we actually developed a closer relationship after I was in service because we were writing letters back and forth every day. We wrote back and forth and communicated. When I was in the States, I would usually call once a week and talk to her for maybe an hour, hour and a half at a time. But it was, you learn, especially for people who have not lived by themselves, you learn to live by yourself and support yourself, but you also develop relationships with your fellow shipmates, and you become part of a team. And I think that's something that's very important.
Talking about your wife, can you just tell me a little bit about her and like how you met and why you decided to get married before you left?
Well, my wife and I, we dated for approximately 2 years. We actually met through my church, or our church. She went to the same church that I did, and we developed a relationship through the church. And then we just basically decided that we wanted to live together, so we got married. And then, like I said, I knew that I was in the reserves when we actually got married. In fact, I had just finished FTA school when we got married.
How did having a wife back home affect your mindset or your outlook on the ship, maybe compared to a single guy?
Well, I would say that it gave you something to look forward to, and it gave you that will and desire to say, hey, I'm going to do my job, I'm going to get back home and get back with my wife as soon as I possibly can. So I think in that respect, it gave you a confidence and a hope or something to look forward to come back home.
And then what was it like getting those letters, like opening them up, or like describe for me what it was like to get one?
Well, that was something that you kind of got to the point where you look forward to it. And Linda has said the same thing, that she likes to, or look forward to getting letters from me. Usually she got one about every other day or maybe closer, but they usually were, like I said, we wrote every day, so sometimes they wouldn't all get there at the appropriate time. They'd be grouped together, but at least it kept us in communication or in touch with each other. And I look forward to getting letters from her because it kept me abreast of what was going on back here at home.
How did those communication skills and the experience of you being away from each other, how has that shaped your marriage today?
I think it's made it stronger because I think we developed, like I said, the communication and the feelings for each other. We were married for 4 months. We just basically had just gotten started in our lives, and then I had to pick up and leave. And at first, Linda wanted to go with me, and I said there was no reason that she needed to go with me because I knew that I was not going to be in California very long. I knew I was going to go overseas someplace, and I said, you might as well be at home with your family and your friends rather than being in California where you basically knew no one.
Do you guys have any children?
Yes, I have 2 boys. Both of them are, well, my oldest one is 40 years old and my younger one is 35.
Did either of them serve in the military?
No, neither one of them have been in the military. In fact, there was no draft. By the time they got old enough to be eligible for the draft, they had already disbanded the draft, so neither one of them went into the service.
I want to interrupt the letters and answer Cassidy, please. What did you guys write about? I mean, did you write about feelings? Did you write about the war? What were some of the things you guys talked about in your letters?
Well, basically, we just wrote about what was going on in our lives at that particular time. And of course, I knew that I couldn't put everything in my letters to Linda that I would have liked to, because that would have been information that they would have basically said was censored information or secret information that would allow people, if it was intercepted by the wrong people, to track what our operations were or something like that. So, no, I didn't write everything back to her, although there was never a time, I don't think, when there was any information that was disclosed that would have been detrimental to the ship or myself.
Do you still have these letters?
Linda still has some of her letters, and she kept some of the letters that she wrote to me, but we don't have them all, no.
So you mean do you mean that your letters were read before you sealed the envelope?
The ones coming from me back to her, there was the possibility of censorship there, although I don't know of any of them that were ever censored or read.
Did that change? You talked about, other than just, you couldn't give specifics, was there anything else that you were afraid to ever share in the letters because you didn't want someone else to read it?
No, it was, we basically, just like writing a letter was just like you and I sitting here talking back and forth. We were just carrying on a conversation between the two of us, only it was a written conversation rather than a spoken.
Right, and then when you were talking about your time in the service and things you got out of it, you mentioned what it was like to be a part of a team and how important that was. Can you tell me a little bit about that team atmosphere?
Well, the team atmosphere in the Navy, or any part of the military for that matter, you have to develop the team relationship in order to be able to survive. Individuals can have a very hard time of surviving if they're not part of a team, and that's part of what your training and your learning is you learn to function as a team rather than as an individual.
And then what was that like? Was there team, other than just the actual working together, the team camaraderie and that kind of thing? What was that like?
Well, a lot of the relationships that you developed with your shipmates was there were people that you basically, their feelings and thoughts about life and your feelings and thoughts about life were very similar. So those were the people that you learned to associate with, and you had fun with them when you were on R&R and things like that. You went out and enjoyed life just like you would here at home, except it was just a different individual.
Do you keep in contact with any of these Navy friends now?
Yes, I've got one person that I definitely keep in contact with that was in my same division that I was in on the ship, and then I've got a couple others that I would like to make contact with that I haven't been able to make contact with yet. But yeah, I would like to keep in contact with all of my shipmates if I could do it.
How do you think Navy friendships are different than friendships you make back home?
Well, I think you have the uh, trust aspect of you learn to trust the people that you're with because you know that if you ever run into a situation there, you're going to have someone there that can basically have the same thoughts, same feelings, and same trainings as what you have. So you can develop that trust between the two of you, and that goes for the rest of your shipmates too. You learn to trust because it's a way of survival when you're in the service.
Did you find it hard at first to trust these people, or was it like, did it develop, or was it just kind of automatic?
Well, of course, everybody was in the same situation that was being brought together, but everyone had had a certain amount of training, and so you knew that their feelings and their thoughts were very similar to yours. So I would say that it probably developed a little quicker relationship of trust when being a service person than it would have maybe for somebody that was in uh, the regular civilian life.
So we mentioned that being in war like strengthened the relationship with your wife. You gained like how to work in a team. Is there anything else you think you gained from the military that someone who hasn't served wouldn't have?
Well, I would say that I've pretty much have covered everything that I can think of as far as the military and what it has taught me. As far as it basically taught me a real appreciation of life and what I have. It also gave me, as we were in some of the ports overseas, we got a chance to see some of the living conditions and stuff of people over in foreign countries, and you get an appreciation for what you have here in the United States because a lot of those people over there have nothing compared to what we have here in the United States, and we need to really appreciate and protect everything that we have here because we don't know how good we have it until you've actually seen what has been in some of those foreign countries. Their lifestyle, their quality of life is not what it is here in the United States.
Can you describe those living conditions you saw for me? Like, what did you see?
Well, in a lot of the countries that we were in, of course, we were not in that many of them, but we were in the Philippines, we were in Japan, and we were in China, Hong Kong. And in most cases, the best living conditions over there were maybe about a step above of what we have of some of our slum conditions in the United States. So there's a real, like I said, you learn to appreciate what you have here based on what you see that the people over there are living in and experiencing.
I guess just like kind of like take me there. Like I have a hard time visualizing. Like really, what did you see in these countries? Like what were the living conditions specifically? Like,
Well,
describe it for me.
a lot of the people, especially in the Philippines, in the area that we were in, which was around Subic Bay area, a lot of those people there, they didn't have paved streets. There was no sidewalks. Um, you basically saw a lot of poverty. Uh, People were poor. They just maybe for their country, they were, I guess you would say, that some of them might have been in the upper class, but they were still in relationship to what we have here in the United States. They would be considered poor people.
Like what were they living in?
A lot of them were living in shack huts or shack homes. Their homes were not. We didn't have homes like we see here in the United States. They weren't brick homes. They weren't nice sided buildings. A lot of them were just kind of piecemeal put together, and people were living and surviving in those. Some of the homes, you could tell they didn't even have wood floors or anything like that. They were living on dirt floors.
Did you ever interact with any of these people, or did you just kind of see?
As far as actually interacting with them, no, I didn't. Now, the one time that I probably saw the most of any time was when we went on one of our R&R trips. We went up to the Air Force Base at Baguio in the Philippines, and as we were traveling from Subic Bay up to Baguio, we saw and went through a lot of towns where it was just, like I said, they were just basically slum towns that, in relationship to what we had here in the United States, they had not near the quality of life that we have here.
Seeing that kind of poverty, did it affect your life or like change anything when you came back home for you?
It basically made me appreciate what I got or what I had when I got back home, and I also learned to develop a feeling for some of the people here in the United States who live in sort of slum conditions, but maybe not what you would call real heavy slum.
Have you ever like been back to any of those countries or anything that you had visited while on the ship?
No, I haven't. I haven't been overseas any.
And then what specifically, if you're talking about, made you appreciate, what aspects of your life did you appreciate?
As far as military life or
When you came back, like life in America?
life in America? Well, for one thing, I had a good job when I got back home, and I've continued to have a good job clear up until the time that I retired. Living conditions have been good, and I think that the one thing that probably disturbed me more than anything was the fact that when we came back from service, it didn't seem like there was the appreciation of our soldiers coming back home that we have had in other wars. Some of the boys, I think, is basically had the same situation that we're in Iraq and Afghanistan. They basically put their time in, they came home, and a lot of them didn't. The people back home weren't appreciative of what they had committed and what they had done for them.
Personally, was there anyone who made you feel unappreciative? That made
No.
you feel unappreciated, rather.
No, I don't think there's anyone that has actually made comment or contact to me that has tried to discourage me or change my line of thinking as far as how I feel versus how they feel.
And then you talked about you had a good job when you came back. What was that job?
Well, when I got back from service, I was working for Magnavox Corporation here in Urbana. I was working on military contracts for Magnavox at that time, so I knew I had a good job when I was there. And of course, unfortunately, Magnavox plant closed here, and then I went into regular civilian life as far as civilian jobs.
I'm gonna interject. Bob, can you tell us when you came back, how were you received? Did you wear your uniform in public? You know, that kind of thing.
Basically, when we were traveling, anytime we were en route from one location to another, we had to wear our military uniforms. But like anyone else, once I got back home, my military uniform came off, and I tried to blend in to the population just like another individual.
Why did you feel like you had to blend in?
Well, I didn't really feel like I didn't want to have my military uniform on and stand out as, hey, there's a soldier. I just basically wanted to be just a common, ordinary person, just like everyone else.
Why? Why didn't you want to like tell people, be like, yeah, I was a sailor? Like, why did you just want to be a common person?
Well, that's just not my nature. I basically, I guess you'd have to say that I'm not a proud person that likes to boast about what I've done. I just want to be part of the regular population and do what I do because of what I know how to do.
So you didn't feel pressure from anyone to blend in? It was just your personal?
No, it was just my choice.
There you go.
So Bob, you talked about, when you were talking about the draft, you said, it might be good, but maybe not, because some people then had to serve who didn't want to. Did you ever meet any of those folks? And if so, what do you remember?
Basically, I can't say that I've ever run into anyone that was openly opposed to the draft. I think there were a lot of them that maybe didn't feel like they were draft material. And as I said, I think a lot of that has proven out in the last few years, in the fact that people aren't rushing to join the military. They're just willing to let the other person do it. And that is one of the things that I think is going to maybe come back to bite the United States, is the fact that we're not going to have the qualified people that we need, or the people that want to be in the military.
If there hadn't have been a draft, would you have considered joining the military?
I think as long as I had a good job here, I probably would not. And then, of course, once I got married, I knew that that was going to change things too, because when you're in the military, unless you're in a service that you're basically land-based someplace, your wife cannot be with you. So in that respect, I would say that a lot would depend on the circumstances. But I had one cousin who was a life career person in the military, in the Navy. In fact, he was one of the people that had a lot of influence on getting me to go into the Navy, because he said that you will experience things in the Navy that you probably will never get to experience in your life otherwise. So he said, therefore, I think if you can, you need to take advantage of it. But he said it needs to be your choice to go into the military, and not feel like you're being forced to go.
So you feel it was your choice? You didn't to enter, kind of?
Yeah, I would say it was my choice to do what I did.
What was your opinion of war in the Vietnam War before you actually went?
Well, basically, I don't know as I had an opinion, because the war was going on before I actually went in. In fact, I think the Vietnam War actually started back in 1955, which at that point in time I was only 10 years old. Being at that age, I really, like any other young child today, that was something that was least from my thoughts or worries at that point in time. As I grew older and the Vietnam War began to escalate and get bigger, then I started to become a little more involved. But until I actually got out of high school, I don't think I was ever that concerned about the military or what the military was actually doing. I just thought that they were there as our protectors, and that's basically where I looked at it, or how I looked at it.
How did you get these views? What do you think how did you develop those views of the military?
Through my upbringing, my parents, what they taught me, and how I basically approach life. As far as when you're in school, you study history a little bit. You learn that there are places where there's oppression, so therefore you have to learn to live with that. And that's just basically how I look at life, I guess. It's just part of it.
Were either one of your parents military?
No. I had several cousins that were in the military. Most of them were in the Korean War, and, well, I think they were all in the Korean War. A couple of them were in World War II, but that was it.
And so then you said before you went to the war, you didn't really have an opinion on the Vietnam War. Once you got there, did you develop an opinion?
Um, I would say no. I think that there again, it was just part of my life experience, and I knew that I was in the Navy. I had a job to do, and that's pretty much the way I approached it. I never felt bitter toward the world. I never felt bitter toward the Navy or the military, either one.
Did you ever think about like the purpose of the war, like what you were fighting for, or did you just this is my job?
Basically, I thought about it in the fact that I knew what the United States was trying to accomplish. We were trying to keep a country from being overrun by the communist regime of North Vietnam. And it would be just like if somebody came in and tried to take over the United States. We basically were there to help them protect the South Vietnamese against the North Vietnamese.
So I want to start with I saw when I was scanning through your book before this
Mm-hmm.
about something about a friend and you making kind of like a donation to the memorial. Can you tell me a little bit about that friend?
You mean the one that was killed during the Vietnam War? Well, he was actually a year younger than I was, but we were good friends, grew up together, and went to school together. He went into the military right after he got out of high school, I think, and I basically was rather shocked when I got the word that he had been killed over in Vietnam.
Where were you? When was this when you found out?
Oh, it was probably, I think he was killed in early '67, so that would have been when I found out about it.
Was this when you were in the tech school?
Mm, yeah, this would have been when I was going to FTA school.
And then can you just like, what was it like? How did you find out? Like, what was it like to find out?
Well, I think, of course, being from a smaller town, when word came back to the town that he had been killed over in Vietnam, of course, everybody was a little bit saddened and concerned that how it had happened and where it happened and all that kind of stuff. But I wouldn't say that it changed my life or anything. It was one of those unfortunate things that you lost a friend and you knew why you lost your friend, and that was it.
Since at this point you hadn't been to the war yet, did it change your view on the war or going to war or anything?
I wouldn't say it did, no.
And how did you find out? Did you get a phone call?
No, I didn't get a phone call on that. It was just like I said, we were a small town, and word got back to the Farmer City, and we knew about it. His brother and I went to school together, so we were friends, and of course everybody pulled together and helped each other through the situation.
And now the paperwork that was in that book, can you describe what that was exactly?
Which paperwork was that?
It was something that had a name on it. It said something to do with like a donation, I believe.
No, it wasn't a donation that I made. It was anybody that wanted to donate to this. It's actually part of the traveling Vietnam War wall that they have, and you can make donations to that in memory of someone who was killed during the Vietnam War.
And so, would you make that donation, or you just someone else had and you found that?
No, that was information that I got. I have not made a donation to that.
Can you tell us the name of your friend and the circumstances of his death?
His name was Fred O'Malley, and he was basically he was an infantryman on a tank and was shot by a sniper while he was on the tank.
And so then, have you been to the memorial or seen the traveling wall at all?
Yes, I have seen the traveling wall of Vietnam, and it's a very It's very similar to the actual wall, except it's not near as big, and it's not made out of the granite wall like the real thing is. But I forget now exactly how long. It's probably 100 to 150 yards long, the wall that they have, and it only stands about probably 2.5 to 3 foot tall. But they have it stretched out just like the actual Vietnam Wall is.
What was it like seeing that, or like walk me through what was going through your mind when you were there?
Well, it's very saddening to see the number of names that are on that wall and know that these were people that gave up their lives for a cause that they felt was good and that they were there to support. It was, like I said, you don't realize the scope and enormity of it until you actually see the wall and see all these names of young men and women that lost their lives.
All right, so I think moving on to a little more happier memories. Is there, so that the buddy you had that you say you still keep in contact with from the Navy, is there like, can you tell me a little bit about him or like something on the ship, like a good story or anything?
Well, Larry and I, we spent a lot of time together. We got to know each other because we both went on the ship about the same time, and we had a lot of like interests between the two of us. And we got to know each other very well and was very close. He was the same rate as what I was, FT, and everything just pretty well clicked together. For one thing, he was a pilot. He liked to fly, or he was an instructor as a pilot. So he took me up for an airplane ride while we were out in San Diego. And as I said, we just basically developed a real close relationship between the two of us.
Do you have any like funny or like good stories about your friendship that like something on the ship that like comes to mind?
Oh, he was, of course, he wasn't married at the time, so he was always giving me a hard time about Linda and I and the fact that I was married and he wasn't. And so he liked to give me a hard time about being married. He used to call me old grandpa. He said, old grandpa's got to get a hold of mama and talk to her. So he would give me a hard time about that, but he got married shortly after he got out of service then. And so we still, like I said, we still communicate back and forth.
Does he live close to here?
He lives in South Carolina, so he's not real close.
And then speaking of your wife again, tell me a little about what it was like to like come home.
Well, there was one piece of paper that was in that book there that the chaplain on the ship basically passed these out to all the people as they were leaving the ship. And it was basically a list of 10 things that he said you do and don't want to do when you go home. And he said, if you follow these rules, he said, I think you will have a reentry back into civilian life and it will work out very well for you. And it was a good guidance. He said, you've been gone for, in some cases, a lot of us had been gone for 10 or 12 months at a time, and he said, things are going to be different. Your wife has been taking care of things at home, and you come back in, and he said, don't try and take over everything all at one time. He said, just kind of ease yourself back in and let yourself get readjusted to being back in civilian life versus military life. And he said, I think everything will work out great for you.
Did you take his advice? Like, how was it readjusting back to being home with your wife?
I would say that it was very good. Being back home, it was good to be back home with her, for one thing. Like I said, it wasn't like I hadn't talked to her or hadn't written to her or seen her, because she came out on 2 Labor Day weekends when we were between cruises. She came out to see me in San Diego, but it was just, well, I would say it was just the transition from military life to civilian life was the biggest difference, because you do things in the military a little bit different than you do when you're in civilian life, and you're on a little more rigid schedule in the military than you are in civilian life. So in that respect, I think it was making that transition was probably harder than anything as far as getting back together.
When you came home, was she like waiting for you? Like, what was the process? Did you get on a plane? Were you on your ship? Like, how did you get back home?
Basically, we sailed back into San Diego on the ship, and a lot of the wives were able to, their husbands or wives lived there in the San Diego area, so they were actually able to meet the ship when we came in. But in Linda's case, she was back here, and she didn't want to come back or go clear out to California to be there. She said she had often wished that she had been there for at least one of the returns that we made. But it was the first cruise I got home, we landed, and within a day and a half, I was on a plane coming home on 30 days leave. So I got home as quick as I could once I got off the ship.
Was she waiting for you at the airport?
She was waiting for me at the airport.
What was it like to like see her again?
Oh, that was something that was great, because, like I said, it had been probably 8 months or so since I had seen her, and she met me at the airport. And I remember one instance where the first time that I came home, I was calling on the telephone to get a hold of her to tell her that I had gotten into Chicago, and here I see her coming down the aisle in the airport, coming down to meet me, because she knew that approximately what time my plane was supposed to get in. And I was in such a hurry to see her that I walked off and left my billfold laying there by the telephone. And fortunately, I got the billfold back. I didn't get the money that was in it back, but I got the billfold back about 3 weeks later. But it was a real joy just to get back home and be able to be with her again.
And you talked about how you exchange letters. Is there any like specific letter or like a specific day where you just remember getting one because you really needed it, or maybe a letter that said something that just like resonates with you? Is there any specific instance with that?
No, I wouldn't say that there was any one letter that stood out in my mind more than others, because I was always anxious to get letters from her, and she was anxious to get letters from me. So in that respect, I would say that it gave us something to look forward to when we got our letters. And not always was the mail delivery for the military, especially when you're on a ship, is not quite like it is with the Postal Service today, although the Postal Service probably is not perfect, but they're a little more accurate and on time than what it is when you're on board ship.
Do you guys still write to each other ever, or any of those like habits, have they?
Basically, no, we don't, because we're together, and we actually can sit and talk and communicate back and forth and not have to write letters.
Is there any other? I had a question. In that case, there was medals. What were they for?
Actually, I had 4 medals. One of them was the National Defense Ribbon. One was the Republic of Vietnam ribbon. And I don't even remember what the other 2 were now. They were connected with the Vietnam War.
And what did you get them for specifically?
Well, the National Defense Ribbon, every soldier that goes on active duty has that ribbon. And then depending on what branch of service you're in and where you serve, you get ribbons based on that from your branch of service.
What did it mean to you to get those ribbon, and like what does it mean to you to have them?
Well, it basically just, I guess you'd have to say it identifies you as a military person, and over the years it will identify you as where you served and how you served or what you served. That one ribbon that I've got has three gold stars on the ribbon, which means that we served or spent 3 cruises over Vietnam.
Did you ever? I don't think we touched on this. Did you ever? Had you any like Vietnamese friend? Do you know any Vietnamese now?
No, I don't.
Have you ever been to Vietnam since?
No.
Okay. When you came home, or even maybe before you left, did you witness any protests? Anything?
No, most of the protests were going on during the time that I was actually over in Vietnam on the ship, so I didn't actually get involved in any of those that were taking place back here in the States.
Okay. Do you think like the entire experience has it changed the way you view war in general?
Well, I don't think it's actually changed my views on war. I guess the one thing that really disturbed me more than anything about the Vietnam War was the fact that we spent all of the time and invested the money and the lives in the Vietnam War and basically came home with nothing because of the anti-war sentiment that was going on here in the United States. People didn't want to support it. Therefore, we basically said, okay, we're going to pull out, and we left. But it was really too bad because we basically had control of that war, and there should have been a declaration of we won the war and that was it, rather than getting out the way we did, which I think was kind of a backward way.
Why do you like? What did you think about those people that were anti-war and like the protesters? Like, as a veteran, like, how did that make you like feel?
Well, it kind of makes me feel a little bit disturbed about what these people really value here in the United States. I don't think very many of them realized what those that were of us that were serving over there, they didn't realize what we were investing and what we were trying to accomplish. I think the only thing they were looking at was, hey, we were spending money over in Vietnam and we weren't accomplishing anything, but that really wasn't the case. We were in control of that war when we basically pulled out, and I think it was a big political situation that we pulled out of, and we should have never ended it the way we did.
Why do you think people had like the wrong vision of the war? In your opinion, you thought it was wrong.
Well, I don't really know why people feel the way they do. As I stated earlier, I don't think people really realize what we were trying to accomplish over there, and if they had just followed through on it, I think we could have accomplished a lot of what we were working to do, and that was to show the people of North Vietnam that they could not come in and take over a country and say, we're imposing our lifestyle on you. We want to let you develop your own lifestyle. And I think that in almost every circumstance, especially in the Vietnam War, the Afghan War, and the Iraqi War, I think all three of those were cases where we were trying to keep a country from having a government imposed on them that they didn't want. And that was our whole purpose behind why we were involved.
And then just kind of going back to your time on the ship, is there any, you said you shot the guns a lot, but is there any like one day that there was just like a lot of shooting or something happened with the guns or anything that's just like memorable Any day that sticks out?
Well, probably one of the longest days that we had there were actually two of them. One of them was the day that we uh, basically took out an island that was off of the coast of North Vietnam. That they had gun emplacements on this island that they were shooting back out at our ships, and they were fortunate enough to hit two or three of our ships. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I should say, we weren't one of them that got shot at, but it was our duty or job to go in and basically take out this island. And we spent one whole day just basically shooting at this island and taking out the gun emplacements that they had on the island. And probably the other most memorable time that we had was when this was right before we came home. We were down right next to the DMZ, and there was a Air Force or a Navy pilot that went down in his airplane. He flew back out over the ocean and got down and landed it in the water and was actually there, and we got called in to give him support because the North Vietnamese were firing, trying to destroy him or kill him, and we got called in to go in. We got some counterfire from off of that because of getting in close and trying to save this pilot.
Two things. What do you mean by take out an island?
Well, basically they had a bunch of caves in this island that they had fixed up, and that's where they had their guns on rollers so that they could roll them in and roll them out. And what we did was we used our 8-inch guns to actually fire into these caves and explode them, so that when we left the island that day, it was actually smoking. So that's basically what I meant when I said we destroyed the island.
And then you said you wanted to save that pilot. So did you actually end up saving the pilot?
Yes, the Air Force flew in and picked him up out of the water with the helicopter, but because of the fire that they were getting from the shore, from the Vietnamese, they needed somebody to silence those guns on shore so that they could get their helicopters in and pick this pilot up. But yes, they did pick up the pilot and rescue him.
Did you ever find out, or was there any way to know, like, whatever happened to the pilot or who the pilot was?
I don't know exactly. As far as I know, he suffered virtually, well, I'll say no, but he had minimal injuries because they were able to actually pick him up and take him into the helicopter and take him to the hospital or wherever he had to go to get taken care of.
What was, like, the atmosphere on the ship like that day when you saved the pilot?
Well, that happened one afternoon. We were getting ready to go to the evening meal, and all of a sudden we had shells actually exploding. We could hear them coming and hitting the side of the ship underwater. We knew that we were taking fire from someplace, and we knew that we didn't know what it was all about or anything, but we knew that it was serious. And within about 10 minutes, while the ship went to general quarters, and which meant that we were in a full military status or war status, where we could do whatever we needed to do to take care of our mission.
And then once the pilot was saved and you were kind of like out of enemy fire, what was that atmosphere like?
Well, it was a feeling of relief, and everything just kind of settled back to normal. Everybody went back and finished up their evening meal, and we went about our business just like normal.
Can you kind of describe for me, like, what did it sound like? What did it feel like when the ship kind of, like, you heard, like, when it was
The
fire?
shells, well, I don't know how you actually would describe it, but they were small shells that were exploding in the water next to the ship, and it was just like a kind of a plunk, and you'd hear them, and then you'd hear the metal from the shell hit the side of the ship, And that's basically all we heard.
Could you feel it at all?
No. No, when you got a ship as big as we had, you weren't going to feel too much through the water other than just the noise.
Was it really loud, or was it kind of...
No, it was very muffled.
Is there anything else that you think I've missed that you want to share, or a story that, like, means something to you about the Navy that you like to tell, or anything that you can think of?
No, I think we've pretty well covered everything that I've felt when I was in the service, and all my feelings of why I feel the way I do about military service in general. So I really don't think there's any things that we haven't covered.
Was there ever a time when you were afraid? And just answer to Cassidy.
Oh, probably the one time that I was more afraid than any, I guess, was the day that we went up and shot that island off of North Vietnam, because that was my first really big mission that the ship had been on, and I'd only been on the ship about probably a month and a half or 2 months when we went on that mission. So it was a new experience for me to go through that type of mission and do the things that we had to do and take care of.
So that story, that's awesome. So pick the story up from there. Tell us how you got notified of that mission. Just, I know you told us some of the details, but take us back to that, how you got notice of the mission, and then what happened after that.
Well, we basically found out that morning when we went to quarters that was our mission for that day, was to go up and, in conjunction with about 2 or 3 other ships, to go in and attack this island and take out these gun emplacements that were on the island. That was basically, as I said, the way we got our information was when we went to quarters that morning. They told us what our mission was going to be, and at that time they didn't have any idea how long it was going to take, but they said that we would be there until such time as we felt that the island was no longer a threat to the naval ships that were in and around the island.
And then what was it saying you were kind of like afraid during? So again, if you could just like walk me through what it was like when you knew like the mission, like how did you know the mission was over?
Well, basically we went to general quarters, which is meaning the ship was at full readiness to go in and do whatever we had to do. Everybody had their own working spaces that we were assigned to for general quarters, and we were in those spaces, and we were at ready. We had our equipment all up and working, had our radars on, and we were basically ready to go. And then the one thing that they did during the time that we were in the mission, if you were not in part of the ship where you had to be on the outside part of the ship, they took everybody and moved them inside the skin of the ship so that there was protection in case we did receive counterfire from the shore. People wouldn't be exposed to the shelling and stuff like that. So we basically stayed at that condition until that afternoon, which was about 3 or 4 o'clock, I think, in the afternoon when we finally finished up. And then, of course, they took us from our general quarters back to our regular standard watch conditions, and everybody went back to their normal routine.
What was it like just going back to your regular routine? Like, can you just tell me about that transition?
Well, your normal routine was basically you either went on watch where you were ready at your equipment, ready to go do any shooting or anything in case we got a call from the shore for some protection. The rest of the people were either going to go eat, or some of them, if they had watches later that night, they would went down and got in their racks and went to sleep. So it just like I said, you got into your normal routine when you came off of general quarters.
I'm gonna jump in. So this is your first big mission. You got your, you kind of a little bit of fear, and then you bombard this island, take it out, and then you just go back to normal. So how do you transition from that adrenaline? Is there an adrenaline happens when you're kind of in that? And then if so, how do you transfer out of that adrenaline to more normal life on the ship? And also, was there a chaplain on the ship? Did people get a chance to express, sort of process this? Or so take us through the emotional and adrenaline part of what you did, and then going back to normal.
Well, basically, as far as the chaplain, we had the chaplain there. If anybody needed to talk to a chaplain during any time, his door was open 24/7, and you could go and talk to him anytime you wanted to. As far as transitioning from the general quarters back to our regular time, there was, I would say, when we first started the mission, there was a little bit of apprehension on all the crew's feelings, because we didn't know what we were going to encounter once we started shooting on this island. But as the day went on and we found out that we weren't going to be receiving a lot of counter battery from the shore, then people just kind of settled in, and everybody went about doing their job, and that was pretty much the way life went the rest of the day. So I'd say there was a point when the mission first started, there was a high point when everybody was kind of apprehensive, what are we going to encounter? But then as the day went on, things settled back in and everybody went back to normal.